Welcome to part 2 of Parenting the Adolescent Brain. In this part, we will focus on the playbook for helping your adolescent child with emotional expression and emotional control. We spoke at the beginning of this webinar about the myth that negative emotions are bad. So, if they're not bad, what do we do when they show up? When our teens become upset, our goal should be to help them manage their emotions well. The term used for the ideal management of feelings is emotional regulation. Emotional regulation can be organized under two basic headings. 1, getting relief from destabilizing emotions by finding healthy ways to express them. And 2, when necessary, taking a break from unwanted emotions by using healthy tactics to control them. Here's an example of what this might look like. After the disappointment of not getting the mark that your child wanted on a project, they might cry in the presence of a caring teacher or friend. Healthy expression. And then push the pause button on the sadness to take a quiz, healthy control. And then excuse themselves to find a private space to cry a bit more, healthy expression. Regain their composure to get through the rest of the school day, healthy control. And then talk about their disappointment and frustration later on with you, healthy expression. What might look and feel like a rough afternoon to your child, and maybe to you, is actually a masterclass of emotional regulation to those of us who help young people handle their feelings for a living. Most of the time, teens can work out this balance of expression and control on their own, and when they do, they don't always recognize that they managed a tough day really well. However, this ability is not always the case. Fortunately, there's a definite need and lots of room for adults to step in and help. The following slides are going to give you the emotional regulation playbook in 2 volumes. The first volume will guide you through helping teens express their emotions, and the second volume will focus on helping teens take a break from their emotions through healthy control. Emotional expression is the first volume of the playbook because finding an appropriate outlet for feelings almost always provides the needed psychological relief. So I'm going to go through 10 ways to help teens express their emotions to make them more bearable. First skill. There is scientific evidence to confirm the benefit of talking about your feelings. When we are actually in front of a teen who is telling us just how uneasy they are, we need to remember that these descriptions of their emotional pain don't add to their emotional distress, but actually reduce it, even if the descriptions are vivid and dire sounding. So it's important to remember that by the time our teens are telling us that they're feeling anxious, angry, sad, or anything else, they're already using an effective strategy for helping themselves cope with it. As a parent, I often forget this, especially when bedtime is approaching and one of my girls wants to talk about something that's been bothering them. It is difficult at bedtime when I'm feeling tired to recognize that they've already done the amazing work of noticing their emotional discomfort, reflecting on it, giving that feeling a description, and then bringing it to me. In the heat of this moment as parents, we can make the mistake of focusing on why they're holding on to this until bedtime, and then rushing them to get it over with as quickly as possible. Second skill. When our teens tell us about psychological pain, our best response is to listen. Although obvious, it's super difficult to do in reality, because as parents, we hate to see our kids suffer, and we reflexively attempt to ease their distress through problem solving whatever caused it. Instead of trying to erase the problem that caused the upset, we should see, at least at first, whether the act of putting the feelings into words provided the needed relief. If you're listening and waiting to share a thought that came to mind, that is now called turn taking. To really listen, imagine yourself as a newspaper editor and your teen as the reporter reading a draft article about some troubling news of the day. Your task is to wait until the reporter comes to the end of the article and you have to create the headline. I know it takes effort, but it's worth a try. Even if you can't come up with the headline, when we are fully engaged in listening while refraining from pushing for solutions, we are wordlessly communicating that we understand their emotional pain and aren't alarmed by it, and that they too do not need to be afraid of it. And instead of playing whack-a-mole on their problems, we are providing the greatest gift of attention and presence. Third skill. So you've listened, you've headlined, and your teen is still not feeling better. Next, you offer empathy. Although it can seem simple to offer a gentle, "I'm so sorry to hear that," or what you're describing sounds awful. It actually works wonders. Research has shown that kids with more empathetic parents have lower levels of systematic inflammation, which is a biological marker for emotional stress. Nevertheless, we often breeze by empathy and go straight to reassurance. When our teens express themselves to us, we want to reward and reinforce that behavior. Listening attentively and offering empathy shows them that they did the right thing by coming to us. Don't get me wrong, I know by the end of a long day it's hard to muster any empathy, and to top that off, it's a time of day that teens tend to come to us. In my work with teens, I often hear them say, "When I complain, I just want someone to say back, 'That sucks.'" And so, "that sucks" has become my default response to my daughters if my energy is low. Fourth skill. The more precise, the bigger the benefit. Research demonstrates that being able to express inner experiences with precision is associated with better emotional regulation and better mental health overall. Sometimes teens need help arriving at the most appropriate description. So I often hear teens describe themselves as feeling anxious and then go on to describe a frustrating situation with a friend. When someone says that they're anxious, they're generally describing the feeling of not being calm. When I hear the term anxious being used, I'll ask for more information, and if the situation has left them feeling scared or threatened, anxiety fits. But it's not unusual that a more fitting term like irritation, apprehension, or excitement is better. At home, teens are often giving us opportunities to help them develop specificity through making general statements like, "Everything sucks." In this case, you can gently ask, "How come?" If they elaborate, you can then empathize with the way they might be feeling by using different adjectives. For example, if your teen says that they're not happy about the cancellation of an anticipated event, you could respond by empathizing that it makes sense for them to be not happy, and it would be understandable if they were also feeling disappointed, let down, crushed, or angry. Fifth skill. So far, we have assumed that teens will come to us to talk about their emotions, but that's a pretty big assumption. There are some strategies to increase the chances of having a meaningful conversation with your teen who is pretty tight-lipped. The first thing to remember is that teenagers really don't like to be put on the spot, so your number one priority is to keep them out of the hot seat. One way is to steer clear of direct questions. So instead of asking, "How do you feel about your new teacher?" try asking, "What's everybody saying about the new teacher? Do they like her?" Although the aim is to help teens find emotional relief by describing their own feelings, getting them to talk about what their peers are feeling might help get the ball rolling. You can also keep your questions for times when you and your teen are not face-to-face, like on a drive or out for a walk. It can be a lot easier to share when we don't have to make direct eye contact. You could also time the question so that you're close to home. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but if your teen knows that the subject can't last long, they might entertain a brief conversation. Also know that teens may need some time to process a question, so you might want to pose a question that allows space for that by saying something like, "You seemed out of sorts the last couple of days. If you want to chat over the weekend, I'm here to talk." While it's easy to imagine that other parents are sitting around the living room having heart-to-hearts with their teen, I suspect it's pretty rare. So if texting opens up an opportunity for a conversation, it's a great solution. If you do get a response to your text, I would caution you from switching from texting to talking because it might leave your teenager regretting having opened up. And lastly, if you don't get anything back from them, don't take it personally. Teens do like to share what's on their mind, but they usually want it to be on their terms, not yours. Sixth skill. As I just mentioned, teenagers at their very core are autonomy-seeking creatures. And so when we ask about their day at a moment that works for us, we are essentially calling them to a meeting for which we had set both the time and the agenda for. Teens are most likely to open up when they get to set the terms of when this engagement happens. Have you ever had your teen come to you just as you're getting ready to go to bed or already in bed? If so, this is an example of a teenager deciding when the meeting begins and when it ends. They are also setting the agenda and calling the meeting only when their parents had already put their own agenda away for the day. Although untimely and frustrating, as parents, we want our teens to come to us when they need someone to talk to. This means that we need to stand ready to connect under terms that might not work for us. These odd-hour conversations may be how they can express closely held emotions without sacrificing a sense of autonomy. So when this happens, let's remember that we're being called to a meeting that we want to attend. Seventh skill. Research shows that most adolescents like their parents and want to connect with them. A complaint that is often heard from teens is that they do want to talk, but it can be hard to get our attention. I know that I'm guilty of this in my home. There are certainly times when we can't interrupt what we're doing. But if we're home and one of our teens wants to talk to us, we should recognize the opportunity for what it is and welcome it. Dr. Demore suggests a few ways to make ourselves present enough to be accessible, but not so much that we're hovering. This might look like reading nearby when your teen does their homework. Another would be to fold your laundry in a room where your teen is watching TV. Or engage in a task that you don't mind being interrupted from in a high-traffic area when your teen is getting home from school. Eighth skill. Parents make mistakes, and an easy one to make is sharing information that to us seems ordinary, unremarkable, or even cute, but to your teen, it's meant to be a secret. And these errors can keep our teens from wanting to express their emotions to us. So suppose you've tried the above-mentioned skills and your teen still hesitates to share anything with you. At this point, it's worth considering whether you might have said or done something that closed the lines of communication. If you suspect that you're in a situation where you may have shared information that was meant to be kept private, offer a genuine apology. But being free with information isn't the only error that can keep teens quiet. Sometimes they stop talking because we've reacted with a judgmental commentary. And sometimes they'll keep things to themselves if they have a reason to believe that we will come back with a version of, "I told you so." If you suspect you made a mistake or a misstep, offer a heartfelt apology. If you suspect that you made a misstep but you don't know what, try to make a genuine appeal to your teen like, "I can tell that you're not feeling comfortable talking to me about topics that are close to your heart. Is there anything that I've said or done that has gotten in the way? I'm asking because I want to make it right between us." Please know, there are conversations that you'll have with your teen that cannot be kept secret due to health and safety concerns. It is important to discuss this with your teen to ensure the information gets to where it needs to go. Ninth skill. So far, the skills have focused on talking about feelings, but if your teen just isn't a talker or struggles to put thoughts and feelings into words, you may already be aware of the nonverbal tactics your teen uses to find an outlet for emotional tension, like physical activity, creative outlets like writing or drawing, jumping on the trampoline, or listening to carefully curated playlists that they've created for moments when they're feeling sad or angry. With this skill, the only job you have to do is accept that your teen may use some quirky but adaptive tactics to get their feelings out and support their inventive approaches, no matter how offbeat they seem. 10th skill. Sometimes a teen will come home from school in a rotten mood and take out their frustration physically or verbally on a younger sibling who happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. When anything like this happens, it should always be taken seriously. Even if a teen's emotions are justified, the way those emotions are expressed is a problem. You could say something like, "I get it. You had a hard day, but attacking your sister isn't how to deal with it. You can tell me what's wrong, go for a run, or find some other way to feel better. Just leave her out of it." Even if your teen can attribute their behavior to emotions that garner your sympathy, like feeling anxious or stressed, we shouldn't give them a free pass. You could say, "If you want to talk about what's making you anxious, I'm here for that. But being cranky with me is only going to leave us both feeling worse." Redirecting teens' emotional expression is a challenge that comes with the territory of raising an adolescent. That being said, if your teen is discharging emotions that are real grounds for concern, you should contact a professional. Okay, we've gone through the 10 skills for emotional expression. We're going to look at the other side of self-regulation, which is the ability to bring those feelings under control as needed. At age 14, normal changes in the brain lead to a surge in the capacity for abstract thinking. Mostly, this is wonderful because teens suddenly become much more insightful as they can see the world from a new perspective. But the arrival of abstract thinking can bring existential concerns. It's not uncommon for young teenagers to suddenly become alarmed by life's impermanence despite having known about death. It's also not uncommon to find them happily preoccupied with profound philosophical questions, such as whether they have the right to enjoy themselves when there's so much suffering in the world. Most of the time, teens can set aside or let go of disconcerting existential questions, but occasionally some teens can get stuck on them. When responding to teens' psychological distress, we will almost always want to exhaust all the previous options for helping them express their emotions before using any of the strategies that I'm going to share with you next. This is because we need to give emotional expression a chance to work before we guide teens to corral their emotions. You probably experienced doing this already. For example, a teen tells their parent they're nervous about an upcoming school presentation, and the parent gently suggests spending more time preparing, and the teen runs out in a huff. Your advice might be spot on, but when our first response is to point out how they could help their discomfort, teenagers often feel injured. Rather than accepting your input, they feel dismissed and invalidated. So, how do you know when it's time to move from expressing to controlling emotions? When expression isn't working and feelings have become so intense or overwhelming that it's getting in the way of what a teen needs or wants to do, that's when you make the move. So, if your teen is cranky after a rough day, refuses to talk about what's wrong, but is still able to tackle their homework and help clean up after dinner, you can stand back and let them be grumpy. But if your teen wants to cancel an important event because they're too afraid they'll mess it up, and talking about the worry isn't putting their mind at ease, it's time to help them get some of their fears under control. In this second volume, I'm going to go through 9 ways for parents to help teens get the upper hand on disruptive emotions. First skill, distraction. Distraction can sometimes be viewed as a bad thing, and it certainly can be when it's time to focus on our work, a conversation, or driving. But sometimes distraction can be a simple, practical, and efficient way for teens to regulate their emotions, and it's one that they turn to most intuitively. After a long day, many teens come home and instead of getting started on their homework, they search for a funny YouTube video. It might seem strange to suggest YouTube as a strategy for emotional regulation, but if we consider that the alternative might have been allowing their homework to overwhelm them to the point of an angry eruption, it seems like a good solution. Although the dose of distraction is only a workable solution if it's done in short intervals. There are other times when emotionally overloaded teens would benefit from distraction but can't get there on their own because they're caught up in the emotion. For example, having an existential crisis, like I mentioned. At this point, a parent may need to step in. There are some ways that we can ensure that the suggestion of a distraction might be well received. First, we need to be sure that talking about the problem isn't helping. Next, we should be transparent about why we're switching gears from encouraging discussion to encouraging distraction. That conversation might sound a little bit like this. Talking about this doesn't seem to be helping you feel better. Do you think it might be a good idea to take a break from thinking about it today? After that, we must make it clear that we're only pressing the pause button on the topic, not trying to end the discussion altogether. So you can then make a plan to return to the issue in a day or two to see if it looks any different. In this case, the distraction wouldn't look like turning on YouTube every time a worried thought shows up. You may suggest that you'll set aside a planned time for your teen to talk with you about their worry, for example, 10 minutes after dinner every night. The rationale is that your teen will be able to think about other things during the day if they know they've got a planned time to focus on the concern. Stepping away from the troubling thoughts can give teens a chance to put it into perspective. Second, getting stuck on a worried thought for a length of time can elevate blood pressure and heart rate and increase stress hormones in the bloodstream, and so finding something else to focus on can relax the body and give it a chance to recover. Second skill. The neurological development in a teenage brain causes adolescents to feel everything more acutely than the rest of us do. The uncomfortable feelings hit them harder, but fortunately, soothing activities also count for more. So when your teen is obviously uneasy but not in the mood to talk, don't underestimate the power of what seems like a small pleasure. Stand back and appreciate the peace that descends over your teen as they curl up under a blanket enjoying a cup of tea and watching one of their childhood favorite Disney movies. Or be confident at suggesting getting takeout from your teen's favorite restaurant because it might go a long way towards easing their disappointment about a failed math test. Third skill. Sleep is the glue that holds human beings together. If people aren't sleeping, they will struggle to regulate their emotions. If people aren't sleeping, they will feel lousy no matter what. When teens become agitated over small things, or are unusually reactive or temperamental, we should look into the possibility that they're not getting nowhere near the 8 to 10 hours of sleep that adolescents need. Upping exercise has been found to improve sleep quality in both adolescents and adults. Shutting off screen time an hour before you want to fall asleep, cutting caffeine off by midday, these are all strategies that you've heard before. Sleep is not a switch that you can flip, but it's a destination that you arrive at after putting yourself on the path to it. Should you suspect that sleep is the culprit, you might lovingly say, "Honey, right now you seem to be held together with Scotch tape. I know you've got a lot going on, and I'm wondering if part of what's making things hard is that you're very, very tired." I'm hopeful that this comment may result in a conversation about the many demands that your teen has upon them so that you can get creative about what can be skipped, paused, or canceled, at least for a little while, to make time for sleep. But some teens will resist and insist sleep is not the problem. In this case, I might try to see if they're willing to do an experiment in which they sleep just a little bit more for a couple nights and see if they notice a difference. Fourth skill. If you tell somebody that taking a deep breath will make them feel better, you might get an eye roll. You might get more buy-in if you start by acknowledging that taking deep breaths to manage your feelings can sound a bit far-fetched. Our nervous system is comprised of two networks. The sympathetic network responds to our moment-to-moment experiences. When we perceive a threat, the sympathetic nervous system activates. The issue is that the system does not know the difference between a tiger and a test, so it mobilizes our fight or flight system to attack or run by increasing your heart rate and speeding your breathing in order to deliver heavily oxygenated blood to your large muscle groups. The sympathetic nervous system is getting your body ready to fight or run, regardless of what you're actually facing. The second network, the parasympathetic nervous system, takes over when the threat subsides and works to quiet the activity that was just created by the sympathetic nervous system and return the body to a resting state. Here's the problem. A teenager who feels overwhelmed by anxiety or any other form of emotional dysregulation might not wait for the sympathetic system to lay off and the parasympathetic network to kick in. This is where controlled breathing becomes the go-to hack. Breathing deliberately, deeply, and slowly starts the engine of the parasympathetic network. Once your teen understands why deliberate breathing works, you could look up some common breathing techniques online to see what appeals to them. Fifth skill. Sometimes problems that are bothering teenagers lend itself to a solution that we as parents can easily see. Your teen comes and vents to you about a school project and you immediately respond with a solution which then completely closes the lines of communication and leaves your teen saying something like, "You just don't get it." Even though your advice makes sense and is unthreatening, why doesn't it go better? Because you skipped right past every option in the expression playbook and jumped right into solutions and guidance to get the emotional control. It's extremely difficult for most teens and even adults to be open to advice until they feel like they've been heard. If your teen asks for advice, by all means give it. But if they are venting, you will want to listen, empathize, and perhaps offer another emotional expression tool first. So suppose you've done all of this and your teen is still feeling frustrated. Can you then make a suggestion? I wouldn't. I'd first find out if your teen actually wants your help by asking something like, "Do you want me to brainstorm some solutions with you?" If they don't want that, don't despair because you may have given all they needed by using those emotional expression tools, and you've left the door open that you're available to support when and if needed. If they do want your help, the door has been opened, and I would encourage you to brainstorm solutions for parts of the problem that your teen has control over. For best results, offer tentative suggestions and not the final word. For this, I typically start my solutions off with the sentence starter, "I wonder." Sixth skill. When people are having an anxious reaction that is out of proportion to the actual situation, their thinking is usually off track in two ways. First, they're overestimating how bad the situation really is, and second, they're underestimating their ability to deal with it. When teens can't change an unwanted situation, they can sometimes change how they think about it. Well-meaning parents might intuitively find themselves pushing teens to do this when they say, "But think of all the fun you'll have," or "I bet you'll find lots of kids to hang out with." These types of comments are rarely well received. They usually cause teens to double down on their position that the situation is as bad as it seems because we're overshooting. Instead of aiming to help our teens become happy about the situation, we'd be better off aiming to help them become more realistic about it. Set your sights on helping them more accurately estimate how bad the problem might be and what they could do about the problem if it were at its worst. We can gently push back on their assessment of just how bad a situation might be and help them realize that they can handle the emotional stress that is actually likely to arise. Seventh skill. Normally developing adolescents tend to be more egocentric than people at other times in their life. This makes sense because the main task of adolescence is to become a freestanding and defined individual, and so teens naturally need to put more than average focus on themselves. But this also means that they can get caught up in their own concerns, sometimes losing sight of the bigger picture and spiraling a small issue into a bigger problem. Research has shown that helping teens step outside themselves and observe the situation from a third-person perspective can help. So, for example, a teen may become increasingly agitated after assuming they've done a horrible job on a math test and spiral to the point of stressing over how dumb they are, that this will destroy their grade and impact their entrance into college. Instead of disputing their reasoning or pointing out the flaws in it, after using some of those emotional expression tools, try to get them to look at it from the outside by asking something like this. If your best friend said this to you, what would you say back to them? Teens can often lighten their emotional load by describing a personal challenge from a third-person perspective, but it doesn't always stick. So if they respond gently to their hypothetical friend and then go right back to beating up on themselves, the follow-up question might be, what ideas do you have for why you would be so much gentler with your friend about this situation than yourself? Imagine your teen is upset about a picture that has been shared of them that's particularly unflattering and utterly humiliating. Any reassurance is probably going to fail, but it might be helpful to ask something like this. How would you think about the situation if it happened to your friend? Would you be embarrassed for her or mad at the person who did it? This might allow them to see the situation from a vastly more reassuring point of view. Another way to ask these questions is using distance by saying something like, I know this feels really awful right now, but can you picture yourself in 10 years when you're fresh out of college? What do you think the future you would have to say about what the current you is going through now? Eighth skill. Effectively managing our own ups and downs is one of the most powerful ways to help our children handle theirs. The emotional regulation of parents shapes the emotional regulation of their children in 3 ways. First, our children learn a lot about how to navigate challenging emotions by watching what we do. If you complain about a terrible day at work while pouring yourself a glass of wine, you're modeling a way of handling stress. If you say, today was rough, I could really use some fresh air, who's up for a walk, you're modeling another way. Second, how parents manage their own distress strongly influences the psychological climate at home, which then shapes the emotional lives of our children. Parents who are highly reactive are more likely to have children who readily become anxious. Parents who display a lot of negative emotion, such as feeling upset and angry, are more likely to have teens who suffer from depression, anxiety, or behavioral problems. This is not to say that parents should be feelingless robots, but it is to say that if you or another adult in your home routinely struggle to find adaptive ways to express or control your emotions, it's important to seek professional help for your sake and for that of your children. Finally, being able to stay calm when responding to unsettled teens goes a long way towards helping them regain emotional control. I know this is not always easy to do, and from time to time we all react with anger, grow anxious in the presence of an emotional meltdown, or become obviously sad when our teen runs into something painful. Further, it's not helpful for us to remain unaffected by everything our teen brings home. If your teen tells you that they got detention at school, it's perfectly fine for them to hear the tone of your voice and see the look on your face about how unhappy you are with it. That said, we should do our best to make ourselves a secure base that adolescents can count on when they need to regroup. Ninth skill. If teens are actively cutting themselves off from all feelings and relationships, if they're relying on substances, if they're derailing the tasks of normal development or using compulsive behaviors or any other harmful measure to bring emotions under control, parents should seek the guidance of a health professional. Shown here are some of the books that I referenced during this webinar, as well as a few others. I've also added the documentary Childhood 2.0, which dives into real-life issues facing kids today, including cyberbullying, online predators, suicidal ideation, and more. I feel that this is a must-see for parents, but I encourage you to vet it before watching it with your kids. One of the most surprising challenges you will face as a parent is coping with the adolescent brain. Impulsive, dramatic, illogical, the teen brain can drive you crazy with worry and confusion until the stress builds and you find yourself screaming, "What the heck were you thinking?" Whatever your teen is thinking, don't expect them to have your wisdom or insight. While their bodies are adult-like, their brains are anything but. Poor decision-making and questionable behavior are unfortunately normal at this age, but it does get better, eventually. I hope this webinar has provided you with new information and education on your tween or teen, as well as some practical tips and tricks to manage this challenging and potentially rewarding part of the parenting journey. If you want to learn more, please reach out to me directly by email at hello@kendrawagnercounseling.com. Thanks for watching and take good care.